Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. And you'll never miss a story again. Kurt pulled into the driveway just after 7. The porch light flickered as dusk settled over the quiet neighborhood, a sharp contrast to the turmoil brewing in his chest. He sat in the car for a few seconds longer than usual, engine off, keys in hand, trying to summon the energy to step inside. Another long day at the auto shop, another stack of bills waiting on the kitchen counter, and another night where nothing he did seemed to be right. He exhaled and stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel as he made his way to the front door. Before he could even turn the knob, he heard Jenna's voice through the thin walls, sharp, frustrated, and pacing. "You said you'd be home by 6. 6, Kurt. Not 7:15. Kurt closed his eyes briefly, preparing himself, then stepped inside. Jenna was already in the kitchen, arms crossed, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun. She was still in her work clothes, an apron tossed over the back of a chair. Carrie sat quietly at the dining table, drawing with crayons. She didn't look up. "I got caught up," Kurt said, setting his keys on the counter. "Dave needed help with the transmission. I lost track of time." "You always lose track of time. But when it's something I ask you to do, suddenly the clock matters." "I'm not doing this again," Kurt muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Oh no, we're doing this. Because I'm tired of being the only one holding this family together. I cook, I clean, I take care of Carrie, and you can't even be bothered to text." "I didn't have a free hand," he snapped, louder than intended. Carrie flinched. Jenna's eyes narrowed. "You didn't have a free hand to type 2 words? Running late? That's all I needed, Kurt. I wait here like an idiot, dinner getting cold, Carrie asking where you are again. I'm working. I'm trying to keep us afloat. You think I enjoy being elbow deep in grease all day?" Jenna threw a dish towel onto the counter. "And you think I enjoy sitting in this house every night, wondering which version of you is going to walk through that door?" Kurt looked past her, at their daughter. Carrie's head was still down, but he could see the way her little hand had stopped moving, the crayon frozen mid-scribble. She was pretending not to hear, pretending not to feel it. "Let's not do this in front of her," he said quietly. "She hears it anyway," Jenna said. "She always hears it." Kurt turned away and walked to the living room, sinking into the couch like a man drowning. Jenna followed, her arms crossed tighter. "We used to talk," she said. "Remember that? Before everything became a fight." "You mean before I became a disappointment?" Kurt asked, staring at the blank TV screen. Jenna's voice cracked slightly. "I never said that." "You didn't have to." Silence stretched between them. The air was thick with unsaid things, memories of better times they didn't dare bring up anymore. Kurt remembered the early years, when even burnt toast felt like a shared joke, when Carrie's first steps made them cry together. Now all that was buried under resentment and distance. "I miss you," Jenna said suddenly, her voice softer. Kurt looked up, surprised, but the tenderness only lasted a moment. "But I don't even know who you are anymore. You come home angry, tired, shut down, and I'm always waiting for the next argument." "I don't want to fight," he said, though even he wasn't sure if it was true. Some nights, the fight gave shape to the numbness. "Then why do you?" "Because I'm exhausted," he shouted, standing. "Because I feel like no matter how hard I work, it's never enough. You say I'm distant. I feel like I'm invisible." "Try being home with a kid all day while your husband forgets you exist," she shot back. Carrie's chair scraped against the tile as she stood. Both parents fell silent, watching her shuffle to her room, her coloring left behind like a flag of surrender. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The door closed gently. Kurt exhaled, rubbing his face. "We're failing her," he said quietly. Jenna turned away, her voice brittle. "We've already failed each other." Later that night, Kurt sat in his truck with the radio off, the darkness pressing in. He didn't want to go back inside. He didn't want to sit in that silence. So he turned the key and drove. The bar was only 10 minutes away, a quiet spot on the edge of town with low lights and cheaper beer than judgment. He slid into a stool and ordered something cold, the bartender nodding without asking questions. The drink didn't make things better. It only dulled the noise. He stared at the glass, then at the reflection of himself in the mirror behind the bar. Tired eyes. Frown lines that had deepened over the years. A man who looked more like his father every day. Angry, bitter, and slowly pulling away from everything he once loved. Rough night? The bartender asked casually. Kurt nodded. Something like that. Wife? Kurt gave a humorless laugh. How'd you guess? The bartender shrugged. That look. Seen it 100 times. Kurt didn't answer. He just stared into the amber liquid, thinking about Carrie, her quiet, her sadness. She hadn't smiled in weeks, not really. And that was on him. On both of them. He stayed for 2 drinks, then one more. Not enough to lose himself, just enough to forget for a while. Just enough to question everything. When he finally got back into his truck, it was past midnight. The streets were empty. The house he shared with Jenna and Carrie sat in the distance like a shadow he wasn't sure he could face. He stayed in the driver's seat for a long time. The front light was off. It used to be on, waiting for him. Eventually, he started the engine and drove around the block, then again. Still undecided. Still unsure if going back was the right move, or if walking away might finally be the kinder thing to do. The next morning, Kurt showed up to work 20 minutes late. The shop was already buzzing, engines humming, and tools clanking. George, the older mechanic who'd been with the place for decades, looked up from beneath a hood and smirked. Well, well, look who finally decided to grace us with his presence. Kurt ignored him and headed toward the lockers, slipping into his coveralls. Late night, George called out. Not in the mood, George, Kurt muttered. That bad, huh? Kurt didn't answer. He grabbed his toolbox and headed to the car assigned to him. George followed, wiping his hands with a rag. You know, Kurt, marriage is like a busted carburetor. You can keep patching it, but eventually you gotta decide if it's worth the rebuild, or if it's time to swap it out. Kurt shot him a look. Thanks for the wisdom. Just saying, George replied, raising his hands. You've looked like you're carrying a tire iron in your chest for weeks. Whatever it is, maybe it's time to deal with it before it crushes you. Kurt stared at the engine before him, but didn't see it. He saw Jenna's face, tired and angry. He saw Carrie's small shoulders as she walked away. He heard his own voice, rising louder than he meant. Again and again. He wasn't sure how much more there was to salvage. And somewhere inside him, a question formed. One that scared him more than anything. Was it already too late? Kurt sat on the break room bench at the shop, his elbows on his knees, his coffee going cold in his hands. The usual morning banter from the other mechanics didn't reach him today. He kept staring at the small stain on the floor by the vending machine, zoning in and out of his thoughts like someone trying to listen through a wall. He hadn't gone home last night. He'd parked near the lake and slept in the truck, waking up with a stiff neck and a worse feeling in his chest. The kind that stuck, like a word caught in your throat you didn't want to say out loud. His phone buzzed beside him on the table. A text from Jenna. Carrie asked about you this morning. Are you okay? He read it 3 times before setting the phone down again, not replying. Man, you look like a sad country song, George said, walking in with a sandwich in hand. Kurt gave him a tired look. I feel like one. George sat across from him, tearing open the wrapper. You get any sleep last night, or were you out brooding by the railroad tracks, thinking about life? Something like that. George nodded, slowly chewing. You gonna talk about it, or just keep bottling it up until you start kicking tires? Kurt hesitated. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, George. I really don't. With work or with the wife? Kurt looked at him. Everything. Jenna and I, it's like we're speaking 2 different languages now. And Carrie, she's right in the middle. I hate it. I hate what this is doing to her. George leaned back. Kids are smart. They see through things. And they carry it with them, whether you want them to or not. I keep asking myself if it'd be better if I just left, Kurt admitted. Get out before we break what's left. Or maybe you already did, George said quietly. Sometimes staying and being miserable does more damage than walking away. Kurt stared down at his coffee. So what, I give up? Just like that. George shrugged. I'm not saying that. But ask yourself, when was the last time either of you actually tried to fix it, not argue about it, not avoid it? I mean, really sit down and say, what are we doing here? Kurt didn't answer, because the truth was they hadn't. Not in months, maybe years. They'd been surviving, coexisting, keeping things moving just enough to avoid collapse. Until now. He looked back at his phone. The text still stared up at him, quiet and waiting. Later that day, after the last car was done and the tools were put away, Kurt sat in his truck outside Carrie's school. The bell rang and kids poured out, chattering and laughing. He spotted her, backpack slung over her shoulder, her steps slow, eyes scanning for a car that usually wasn't his. When she saw him, her pace quickened, but there wasn't a smile. Just a quiet recognition. She climbed in without saying much. "Hey," Kurt said gently. "Hi." He started the engine. "Mom said I could pick you up today." "Okay." They drove in silence for a few blocks. "Sorry I wasn't home last night," he said. Carrie looked out the window. "It's okay." "No, it's not," Kurt said. "You didn't do anything wrong, Carrie? You know that, right?" "I know," she said, though her voice barely carried the words. He glanced at her. She was looking out the passenger side, her fingers fiddling with the zipper on her backpack. "You want to talk about anything?" he asked. She shook her head. He nodded slowly. "Okay. But if you ever do, I'm here, no matter what." They pulled up to the house. Jenna was at the door, arms crossed loosely, not angry, just tired. Her eyes met his through the windshield, and there was something there. Not fire this time, just weight. Like she didn't have the energy to yell anymore. Carrie got out and walked ahead. Kurt followed behind. Jenna stepped aside to let them in. "Thanks for picking her up," she said. "Yeah," Kurt replied. "Figured it was time." They stood there for a moment in the living room, neither knowing what to say next. Jenna finally broke the silence. "Did you sleep at the shop?" "Number Lake." She nodded. "I figured." Another pause. Kurt looked around. The house was clean, dinner was half prepped on the stove, and there were Carrie's shoes near the stairs. Small, colorful, and painfully out of place in the middle of this growing emotional wreckage. "I can't keep doing this," Jenna said quietly. Kurt looked at her. "I know. It's not even the fighting. It's the in-between, the silence. The way we walk around each other like strangers in the same house." "I don't know how we got here," he said. "I do," she replied. "We stopped talking. We stopped forgiving. We let the little things pile up until they became walls. I didn't mean for any of it to happen. Neither did I." She looked down at her hands. "You used to come home and tell me everything, even the dumb stuff. You remember that night your car broke down on Main and you walked 5 blocks with your lunch cooler and oil on your face?" Kurt laughed a little. "That was a disaster." "You made it sound like an adventure," she said, smiling briefly. Then her face fell. "When did we stop being on the same side?" He didn't have an answer. That night, after Carrie was asleep and the dishes were washed, Kurt found himself sitting at the kitchen table while Jenna wiped down the counters. It felt almost normal, routine, but there was tension in the quiet. Like they both knew something needed to be said, but neither knew how to start. "Do you think we could fix this?" Kurt finally asked. Jenna turned to face him. "I think we've been avoiding that question for a long time." "I still care about you," he said. "That hasn't gone away." She softened a little. "I care too, but caring isn't enough if we keep hurting each other." He nodded. "I want to try." Trying means more than saying it. It means therapy, real talks, hard decisions. We can't keep pretending things will just go back to how they were. Kurt took a deep breath. "Then let's do it. Counseling. Whatever it takes." Jenna looked at him like she wasn't sure if he meant it, but then she nodded. "All right." For the first time in months, something settled between them. Not peace, not resolution, but maybe a beginning. Later, as he lay on the couch in the living room, staring at the ceiling in the dark, he heard soft footsteps. Carrie walked in, her blanket clutched in one hand. "Can I sleep out here with you?" she asked. He sat up and opened his arms. "Yeah, come here." She curled beside him, her head on his chest, and for a moment, the silence wasn't so heavy. "Are you and Mom gonna be okay?" she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. "We're going to try, sweetheart. We're going to try real hard." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't sound like a storm. It sounded like a shift. The days after their late-night conversation felt different, though not entirely easier. There were still long pauses and occasional missteps, but something had shifted. Kurt noticed it in the way Jenna looked at him during breakfast, or how she didn't recoil when their hands accidentally touched while reaching for the same dish. They hadn't solved everything, not even close, but for the first time in a long while, they were trying. They'd scheduled a counseling session for Saturday afternoon, a neutral ground where both could speak without yelling or shutting down. Jenna had found the name online, a woman recommended by one of her coworkers. Kurt hadn't resisted. That in itself felt like progress. At work, George watched him closely, his hands deep in the engine, bay of an old pickup. "You've been walking around with your head halfway out of a fog," he said one afternoon, wiping his hands on a rag. "Something change?" Kurt leaned against the tool cart, drinking water from a bottle. "We're trying counseling." George raised an eyebrow. "Huh. That a good thing?" "I think so. I don't know. At least we're not yelling over the dishwasher anymore." George chuckled. "Marriage isn't for the faint of heart. It's like trying to fix an engine while it's still running." Kurt smiled faintly. "We've got a long road, but I'm willing to walk it if she is." "Good," George nodded. "But remember, walking it means showing up every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Kurt took that in. He'd always been the type to fix problems with tools and effort, but emotional repairs weren't as simple. He couldn't torque down resentment or patch silence with duct tape. That Friday night, Jenna made dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread. They sat together at the table with Carrie, and for once, there wasn't a storm hanging overhead. It was quiet in a good way. Carrie talked about her science project, and both parents listened. Jenna asked follow-up questions. Kurt offered to help her build the model volcano. Carrie beamed. After dinner, they cleaned up together. Jenna washed, Kurt dried. Their hands bumped once, and she didn't pull away. Later, while Carrie read in her room, they sat in the living room with 2 mugs of tea and a silence that wasn't tense. It just was. "I don't expect things to fix overnight," Jenna said softly. "I just need to know you're in this." "I am," Kurt said, "even when I'm tired, even when I mess up. I want to figure this out." She looked at him. "We have to let go of the things we keep using to hurt each other. All the you always and you never stuff. It builds walls." "I know, I've built a few myself," he admitted, "but I'm ready to knock them down." Saturday came. They dropped Carrie off at Jenna's sister's place and drove in near silence to the therapist's office. The waiting room smelled like lavender and old magazines. They didn't speak much until they were called in. The therapist, Linda, was a calm woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a notepad. She welcomed them, asked them to sit, and began with simple questions. "What brought you here? What are you hoping for? What do you fear most?" They took turns answering. Sometimes they overlapped, sometimes they disagreed, but there was no yelling, no blaming, just honesty. Tentative at first, but real. Jenna admitted she felt invisible, like she'd been carrying too much alone. Kurt admitted he'd been emotionally distant, afraid of not being enough. There were tears, on both sides. By the end of the session, Linda said something that stuck with Kurt the rest of the day. "Marriage is not about never hurting each other. It's about whether you both choose to come back to the table and heal together." On the ride home, Jenna stared out the window. "I didn't know how much I needed to say until it started coming out." "Me too," Kurt said, his hands steady on the wheel. "It felt good to finally say it, to hear you say it." She looked over at him. "I want us to make it, Kurt. Not for Carrie. For us." "I do too," he said. "But I want Carrie to see us fight for each other, not just stay together out of guilt or fear." Back at home, Carrie ran to greet them at the door, hugging them both at once. "Did you have fun?" she asked innocently. Kurt laughed. "It wasn't exactly fun, but it was good." Jenna tousled her daughter's hair. "We're learning how to talk better." Carrie nodded, accepting that answer like it made perfect sense. The next few weeks became a pattern of small steps forward. Kurt started coming home earlier. Jenna stopped keeping silent about things that bothered her. They fought sometimes, of course they did. But now there was a pause, a chance to reset before things escalated. They learned to ask questions like, "What do you need from me right now?" instead of snapping or withdrawing. It wasn't perfect, but it was human, honest. One evening, they sat outside on the porch after putting Carrie to bed. The stars were faint, the air cool. I was afraid we wouldn't make it, Jenna said. I still get scared, Kurt replied. But maybe fear's just proof that it matters. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You remember that lake you parked by the night you left? Yeah, I used to go there in college, sit on the dock and write in my journal. Funny how life circles back like that. He smiled. Maybe next time we'll go together. As a family, she looked up at him. That sounds nice. A week later, they took Carrie there, packed sandwiches and juice boxes, found a quiet bench by the water. Carrie tossed stones into the lake, giggling as the ripples spread out. Kurt wrapped his arm around Jenna's shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, they watched their daughter, not with guilt, not with fear, but with hope. Because maybe healing wasn't one big moment. Maybe it was a collection of small ones, 1,000 choices to stay, to speak, to try again. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, lighting the lake with gold, Kurt finally let go of the question that haunted him that night at the bar. Should I leave? Because now he knew the answer. Number. Not when there's something worth staying for. Not when two people are willing to fight the right way, together. Not when love, though battered, still flickers in the dark, waiting for wind to catch it again. And it had. It truly had.